Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Quality in Action webinar. This is the fourth of our Quality in Action series. We did the Research in Action series for 10 months prior to that. This month's topic is focusing on the recent article, First Do No Harm, Ethical Principles for Youth Mentoring Relationships. It's a short article, but there is a lot of information in it, if any of you have read it in advance, and a lot to cover in an hour, so I'm sure you'll leave with more questions than answers maybe, and it's just such an interesting discussion to have. Let us know if there are, hopefully everyone can hear us, and currently everyone is unmuted, but I'm going to talk about a little bit of our logistics for today. This is me. I am April Reardon. I'm the Director of Training and Community Partnerships here at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota. That's me on the right anyway, and on the left I've had lots of pictures up of me and the baby who's 6 months old, but this is my 5-year-old, Zoe. We're both proudly sporting our Red Sox gear at new Target Field, the new Twins ballpark here in Minneapolis. Anyway, this is my contact information. If you do have already or end up downloading the slides, you can have that information available for any suggestions or comments or questions after the webinar. So we have, it was 20-some people who registered in advance, and the attendees kind of keep plugging in. So one of the ways that we can ask questions, and we really encourage you to jump in, ask questions at any point throughout the webinar, but you can do that in a couple different ways. Since we do have a relatively small group, you feel free to raise your hand, and one of us, either myself or my coworker Shannon, will be able to unmute you so we can just hear your lovely voice and you can ask your question. Otherwise, I know lots of people don't necessarily call in or have the microphone capabilities and they're just listening. You can also type your questions and submit those to us. So that's in part of your menu where you type those questions. If it's a question that we can just respond directly to you, sometimes there are technical questions, we'll do that. But if it's a question that applies to everyone and that it relates to the webinar, we'll just read that aloud then and let people know what that was so you can get that response as well. Only thing we ask is that when you are unmuted, if we unmute you to ask a question, just monitor your background noise. We'll do a little bit of that too. If we unmute and we can hear background noise, we'll just go ahead and mute that so we don't have echoes or typing or children playing in the background, that sort of thing. Okay. So we are very fortunate today to have both Belle Lang and Renee Spencer joining us. They are two of the authors of this article, The Ethical Principles for Youth Mentoring Relationships. Jean Rhodes would be the other author. I just wanted you to, I think we're both in. I think Renee was having some technical difficulties, but both of you are in, so welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, good. We've got both. I can hear you both. And what we are going to do, we have just a little introduction, but then we're going to just jump into the 5 ethical principles for youth mentoring relationships. We have some questions at the end, and some, but hopefully we'll have a great discussion. And if you haven't read it, then we'll get an overview of what these ethical principles are. If you have, there will be lots of opportunities to be able to share some of your thoughts or how you are applying these principles to your work, or how it's informing discussions among your staff, among your board, with funders, and so on. This as background comes later, but maybe I just think it would be a good time if Belle and Renee, if you want to just tell us a little bit about the background for where did this article come from, and yeah, just a little bit of the background for coming up with these ethical principles for youth mentoring relationships.
Sure. What do you think, Val? Okay. Yeah. So I think these principles were really largely driven by the sense of coming to understand mentoring as, intervention where the relationship is really the primary tool. So, we're building these strong connections between youth and adults. And if that's the case, relationships can be a very powerful tool of intervention. If that's the case, there's also a set of responsibilities that comes along with that. And Jean and Belle and I all have clinical backgrounds and have been trained that way in terms of psychotherapy or counseling. And we knew well that, we got a lot of training in sort of how to think about close relationships and the kinds of issues that can arise and sort of basic principles that one should take into account. And we just thought, well, some of these could be applied to youth mentoring and might be really helpful to engage people around thinking about the dilemmas that people in programs are faced with every day, and they're coming to conclusions about them and trying to address them. But maybe having some sort of guiding structure could help in that process and maybe enhance the quality of youth mentoring as a result. So that's really largely the thinking. And I guess in terms of the background of the other component of background of it is really drawing from ethical principles in the helping professions, in psychology, social work, and also in youth serving organizations. Overseas, there are people can get accredited in youth work in ways that we don't here in the United States, and some of those organizations have developed ethical principles for youth workers, and so we borrowed from those as well in our thinking here.
Is there anything
That's a great response, and I would just only add to it that I think that a lot of people assume that mentoring is always a good thing, that every relationship, a mentoring relationship, would be assumed to have positive consequences for a mentee. And what our research shows us is that not every mentoring relationship is necessarily positive, and some can actually be harmful. And the troubling thing about it is that it's not just for those relationships where there's some intentional harm that's being done. Those are actually very rare kinds of relationships. But oftentimes it's just these very nuanced kind of issues, like boundary kinds of infractions that a mentor may not be aware of, that can have more potential effect on their mentee than they intended. And so these principles are just a way of our all becoming more aware of ways to protect those relationships.
Great. Thank you. So this next slide, there's one line. I've read the Ethical Principles article several times now and have kind of presented it in a couple different ways. We, yesterday as a mentoring partnership staff, had a lunch and just sort of informally talking about it, kind of like a book club but an article club, and talking about it. But then also in different training settings when I was asked to talk about the elements of effective practice, the third edition now, and specifically about mentor training, I decided to kind of frame it with some of the ethical principles for youth mentoring and introduce that piece. But the one line from this, the entire article that keeps popping up for me and that I keep presenting to people is it's not even the full sentence. It's just this piece about good intentions alone are not enough. And so, and really thinking about it as how this applies to mentors and to mentoring programs, and that the article is so rich and there's so many different interpretations that everyone who reads it is walking away with sort of a different message, or as one of my coworkers said yesterday, that it really just reframes the message of what mentoring is all about. I just want to pause for a second and see here if other participants, Renee, Belle, or other participants have any reaction just to even to this line and to that introduction of thinking about our good intentions. Or you could, Renee and Belle, you can let us know who wrote this particular line. Yeah.
I don't even remember who wrote it anymore. That's the funny thing about writing with other people, right? You lose track. But I think it's a sentiment that we share deeply, is really having a recognition that people go into this with the best of intentions. And I think Belle's comment about, we think about ethical dilemmas or challenges in mentoring, kind of might think about the worst case scenario. But, the reality is, as she pointed out, people go in with very good intentions and wanting to do the right thing and meaning to do the right thing, but sometimes the right thing is complicated. It's not always so straightforward or clear what the right thing to do is, and that's what makes for an ethical dilemma. And so I think that's really the spirit. And I think that, in some ways, April, you're pulling out this line is very meaningful, because I think that is sort of the driving force in many ways behind this article for us, is that it's not enough. It really is, in fact, not enough to have the best of intentions. Good mentoring requires more than that.
Yeah. We do have a question here, or a comment. After seeing just one failed mentoring relationship and reflecting on why it didn't work, it's a natural progression to come to this thought. Yeah. And that's from, I'm trying to see my questions here. What's that? Oh, it's from Sarah. Hi, Sarah Kermer. Okay, good. So Sarah said, yeah, and I think that's resonated a lot about looking at those failed mentoring relationships, thinking about, that to think that good intentions alone are not enough. That came up a lot in our staff discussion yesterday as well. Just peeking to see if there are any other hands up or questions. Okay. Yeah, this message really resonated a lot, especially in that training setting when I was with the network. It was 47 different mentoring programs and different folks, and framing standards and the mentor training and a lot of pieces under this umbrella of good intentions alone are not enough, but also that we have this ethical obligation to do good by the young people that we're serving, and it really does just send a different message and helps us to justify a lot of the things that we do as mentoring partnerships, as intermediary organizations, and just as program staff as well. All right. So, the article, I think we've hit on some of the sort of introductory pieces of why these ethical principles were necessary, and some of that background already. Another statistic that pops up and really resonates, in a lot of different settings, and we probably, I know I use it in elements of effective practice training. I use it in to talk about risk management, and I use it, in the importance of screening, but the statistic about that half of relationships terminate prematurely. I think this article pulls out too that most often because a volunteer ends that relationship, and that's one of the follow-up questions that I often get asked is, well, if half of the relationships terminate prematurely, it's probably because of the kids or because the kids move or things like that, and to really acknowledge that the volunteer is a big part of some of these relationships ending, and what is our obligation. It would be easy to read this article and think, well, the mentors have so many ethical obligations and we have to make sure that they understand it, but I think recognizing that programs have this obligation to their mentors and to their kids as well. So and the other piece that really has struck is how much training pops up as a solution or as a preventive measure, and that the training can affect so many different things about the match, about the retention, and the quality and those youth outcomes. Okay, and so the 5 guiding principles that are proposed are listed here, and I also suggested this week that really these 5 principles could help, if you're looking to develop a mentor training, if we think about how important that is in addressing some of the pitfalls or challenges that are brought up, that this could really be a good outline for how to train mentors. But we're going to dig into each one of these and hear more from Belle and Renee about each one of these, and then be able to talk about where they all come from, or what it all means for the work that we're doing. So the first is this: promote the welfare and safety of the young person. I'll give you a moment to look at the image of Ernest Hemingway. You have to have a sense of humor with this, right? I like the first do no harm and then one of the first Google images of Ernest Hemingway is him with the shotgun. So there's a quote. There's another one of him sort of boxing himself in the mirror. So I went back and forth between those. But this first do no harm, it's the title of the article, and thinking about that obligation to our young people. I love that the article points out that oftentimes we think of first do no harm as that, like Belle said, that the intentional harm, or we're worried about, and there's all the stigma about mentoring, and that there are adults who are getting into mentoring relationships to intentionally harm young people, and that's such a small percentage of what really happens, and identifying all these other ways that we put young people at risk from their mentoring relationships. I actually had to look up how to pronounce beneficence. I was like, wait a minute, how do I say that if I'm doing this on a webinar? It's one of those words you read all the time. But drawing from those pieces, and I'm gonna let the two of you, if you want to share more about each one of the principles, and especially about this misuse of power and the inappropriate boundaries, because I know from my conversations with others that those have really helped, again, with the framing and thinking about how to justify some of the things that we say in our work, and try to explain boundaries, and then we put it in this ethical construct. It really helps to justify what it is that we're saying.
Mm-hmm. Would you like me to jump in on this one, Renee?
Pardon me, Bill, I'm sorry.
You want me to tackle this one?
Yes, go for it. Thanks.
So it's very fun working with Renee, by the way. This is just so fun to be able to because we've done the webinars individually before, and it's just fun to be able to collaborate with my dear colleague this way. So beneficence, this one seems like such an obvious one. It kind of seems like a no-brainer. Of course, you would not want to do harm to your mentee, a young person who you are, intending to help. We also sometimes think of infractions as being, really egregious ones, like exploitation and abuse, sexual kinds of violations. But actually, it's far more common that that mentors may inadvertently misuse their power or have, blur the boundaries, because some of these principles are in fact a little counterintuitive, like this one around boundaries, because mentoring, is predicated on generosity. It's predicated on the generosity of the mentor. So why would it be important then for the mentor to think twice before giving excessive gifts or money? Why is it important to keep boundaries clear and not have multiple relationships that way? It can sometimes lead to problems in the relationship that are unintended. So, for example, let's say you were a mentor who, started giving, bigger gifts. How would your mentee or the mentee's family feel when you finally drew a line because the expectations of the mentee became too large? Or say you would blur the boundaries. You had a multiple relationship where the mentee was also babysitting for you, and they messed up in some way. They disappointed you in that other relationship. How would it affect then your mentoring relationship? So this first guideline really draws our attention to the importance of doing a number of things in order to protect the mentor and the mentoring relationship, including being careful and really cognizant of the power imbalances in the relationship, and the importance of drawing clear boundaries in the relationship. So that those are the two of the main points with that one. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Renee.
I would just add to those comments, and Belle, it's a pleasure getting to work with you in this way as well. This is such a treat. I would just add sort of some of the thinking behind this. I think, you know, in the push to grow mentoring programs and to sort of grow programs, make more matches, those kinds of things, that sometimes attention to this can shift a little bit. This is sort of like the do no harm, to me, also grows out of this. You know, let's try to make the highest quality matches that we can. And I think that sometimes we can slip into this thinking with mentoring because, as Belle was saying, you know, it's at its heart this sort of sense of generosity about it, that we think that something's better than nothing. Well, you know, getting a kid on a waiting list, something is better than having that kid sit on a waiting list. And actually this principle reminds us that maybe not, because making a poor match could potentially be harmful. And if the, you know, first principle is to keep in mind first do no harm, sometimes doing nothing you know, means that you're not going to put yourself in the position of introducing a failed relationship into the life of a child.
Great. We did have a question. Now I can't seem to find Jenny. I'm not seeing her on our list right now. Maybe something happened here. Here it is. Yeah, Jenny said, I think that is one of the most important points when working with people, and especially vulnerable youth and families. It also emphasizes the importance of staff training and knowledge to share with volunteers. Thanks, Jenny. Feel free to raise hands at any point. Yeah, and over and over again, that training and thinking about and really spelling out that there's that obligation within your training to let mentors know the harm that can arise from those different things, and to put it in that construct. And absolutely. Other thoughts or other comments, and raise your hand or type in your questions about this first principle. Give that opportunity. If they pop up, we'll grab you. Okay. Might be that we talk about them in general. So the second principle is the be trustworthy and responsible. You know, really thinking about, and then in the fidelity, about keeping promises and behaving in a trustworthy manner. This meeting frequency and match duration. You know, it was sort of reading this particular section of the article, I felt like it just kept building. Like, you needed to have this meeting frequency and match duration in place because the consistency and reliability of that helps to build trust, and then, you know, that trust then becomes, you know, research shows that the trust is that keystone of the effective mentoring relationship, so that youth are reporting, and this is from your research, that reporting that honesty and keeping promises and that relationship longevity really help to build trust for them, and we know that then we get more positive youth outcomes. And again, this is where looking at that piece of that you know, more than half of those relationships are ending prematurely. You know, that we've got, and that those premature endings can cause those decrements in youth functioning. And then it really, in the article, expands upon, you know, a couple ways that things that we need, that we as programs are obligated to do to help mentors understand the relationship and the seriousness of the relationship that they're entering, to help them understand how important it is that they are trustworthy and responsible in making the decision to be matched with a young person. And so, you know, really expounding upon mentors with unrealistic expectations, and also about how some mentors might feel shame about their inability to connect. And I'll let Belle and Renee maybe expand a bit on those two pieces.
Just one thought about that, and that is that I think one of the most important things to build into a mentor training is really raising what realistic expectations should be in a mentoring relationship, because so many mentors go into the relationship or go into mentoring programs really hoping that they're going to change the life of a young person, and that it's going to happen in dramatic ways and maybe immediately, and some of them may expect a lot of feedback from the mentee by way of some expression of appreciation. After all, they're taking time out of their busy schedules to do this good thing. And so when all of that is not forthcoming, the changes nor the appreciation, and instead, their mentee's not texting them back, much less calling them back, and no showing, and they're not looking like they're making any changes, mentors can become very, discouraged and think that, well, maybe this wasn't a good match. Maybe my mentee's just not interested in meeting with me, and so may just read the cues in a way that discourages them from staying the course. Because I think that most mentors, again, do not go into the relationship thinking they're going to prematurely terminate. They read, the signs, they look at their lives, and they see, like, okay, all this, expenditure of energy, and yet, there's not the return. And so here's where it becomes really important for mentors to understand the natural developmental progression of a mentoring relationship, that at the beginning of a mentoring relationship, there is going to be a period, they should just expect this period, where the mentee is not going to maybe show interest, and why should they trust you? They don't know you, you're a stranger. That takes time to build, and it takes a lot of time to build. And so if mentors had a better expectation or a clearer expectation around that developmental progression, then they might be able to sort of stay the course during that difficult first period until the later periods when trust begins to develop and they start to hear back more, and they start to potentially see important changes and transformations in the life of the mentee and in their own lives through their participation.
Yeah, and I think I would add here to the point you were making, highlight again the point you were making earlier, April, about sort of the parallel process of these ethical principles. They're written in many ways geared towards mentors, but you can think about programmatic responsibilities and obligations as well. And in this area, I think this is a big one too, is this sense of termination and closure of mentoring relationships. And as Belle was saying, mentors aren't entering in thinking that their relationship's going to end prematurely, but we know, unfortunately, that many do. And I think part of this trustworthy, being trustworthy and responsible is keeping your promises. And so for programs to really reflect, what are we doing to ensure that mentors keep the promises that they've made to children? What's our role in making sure that that happens? What sort of pieces of accountability do we have in place? And then also thinking about what promise the program made to a child. And if a relationship doesn't work out, then what's the program's response to that? How can the program then move in and try to keep the program then be trustworthy, responsible, and keep the commitment made to the child in some way? Do you rematch that child more quickly than the others on your waiting list? Sort of what does it mean that you've made a commitment to a child, and how are you going to sort of make good on that if the mentor, unfortunately, ended up not being able to do so?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I chose this image. You can kind of, at some point, those of you who are participating, if you just Google "be a mentor," you'll see all kinds of images like this about, the sunshine and clean button-down shirts and smiles, and and there's, how else do you, how to think about as programs, how do we accurately portray mentoring? Because we hope that eventually they get to this, but how do you portray that, and is that necessarily, does that happen in the recruitment materials, or maybe it's in that information session, and thinking about then what kinds of things do you have in place for preparing mentors, and starting from the job description or those info sessions, or it also highlights that need for that pre-match training, that something needs to happen, and in order to spend some time giving that accurate portrayal of what's going to happen, and far too many programs are skipping that step. it is all about like, well, you have good intentions and it's going to be easy and these kids are lots of fun. It's going to be great. They're going to love you, or we heard, in our conversation among staff and with others that even when mentors are reporting to programs that I'm having trouble connecting, or I'm having, this isn't working for me, that the mantra is just sort of, well, just hang in there and keep going, because programs really understand that the need to have the longer relationship, and they don't want the premature endings, but also, but that's exactly what Renee was saying, that what's our obligation as programs then to support those mentors and help them through those struggles, or to really listen to what's happening. There was some discussion too amongst our staff of sort of an increased focus on mentor retention and those rates, and that maybe the numbers, if we're shifting our reporting numbers from we have a zillion new matches, that now we're starting to talk a lot about what's our mentor retention rate, like how long are our matches lasting. That maybe we're asking matches that aren't working to stay together longer than they need to be. That was another one of the questions that I've heard raised, and thinking about what is again, in this construct, what's the ethical responsibility there to those relationships and those matches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, related to being trustworthy and responsible is this acting with integrity, which, thinking about the honoring commitments and seeking that program support, that their mentees might be placing a great meaning on the plans and events that they have. Sometimes mentors don't understand how important those plans are. As a mentor myself, I'm totally guilty of this. And thinking, oh, it's not such a big deal if we don't get together today. Let's postpone for a couple of days, and that can really start to, as I chose this image, start to fray the rope. That starts to compromise how well you're connected, and ultimately it can really snap that relationship. You can become really disconnected. So enough of those inconsistencies or kind of flaking out on your commitments. Other things about the integrity. I mean, this is really about that, again, about that commitment, and also understanding how that works out from the mentee's perspective as well, and understanding how much control they have over their schedules or their abilities to communicate with you. And another piece I like about this is that it really, the integrity here is that mentors need to understand that they're the adult, and that it's their job, their obligation to really continue to initiate contact.
Right, and I would just add, April, that it's also, a mentor's responsibility in this digital age to understand how it is that youth communicate and how they maintain their connections, and that relationships and the ways that kids connect may include other modes now than they did before. It may be, that before it was about just giving, a kid a call and saying, let's meet at the coffee shop or whatever. Now really connecting with this child might mean that you don't hear from them by phone and even by email, that it means, understanding something about technology and how kids communicate via all these other ways, through Facebook and email and texting and all of that. And so that, mentors, need not give up that easily if, some of the old tried and true traditional ways of getting connected aren't working as well in this day and age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you hear teenagers say, I don't listen to their voicemail. It takes too long. Can't be bothered. Mentors sort of saying, oh, but my phone call never got returned. Well, the kid doesn't pick up voicemail. It's a great point, Val. The other thing that I think of when I think about this principle is sort of integrity in not over-promising. So I think there can be an impulse when a mentor thinks, oh, I could do this or that. I could I interviewed a mentor recently who really encouraged a child to sign up for a sporting league, but then didn't really take into account that there would be a number of fees involved with it, including equipment. So the mentor was prepared to pay the fee for the one fee but not the other fee, and sort of really thinking about the promises that you're making and can you keep them? Is it a genuine commitment? Is it an impulse in the moment, I want to help in this way, or is it something that can be sustained? And that mentors shouldn't feel like they have to be all things to the young person, but they do have to be really clear about what they can and can't be, and what would be going too far for them, and they wouldn't be able to maintain it. And then again, with this terrific image, April, the relationship begins to unravel because the mentor can't sustain these sort of over-promises because they didn't really sort of reflect and check in with themselves and think, can I really keep this up? Am I really sure that this is what I want to give and how I want to give it? Or could I maintain my connection with this child in these other ways and we still have a good relationship, and there's still something happening here without me, saying I'm going to do all these other things too.
That's such a great point, and I just, that Renee just made, because one of the things that we attend to as, psychologists, as clinicians, is what we call holding the frame, and that means, showing up when you're scheduled to show up, and keeping consistent contact, and really providing an clear expectations for the structure of that relationship, in terms of like frequency and duration of the relationship. And whereas for us as the mentor, or let's say we're a psychologist, a clinician, on that end of the power continuum where we have more power, we may sometimes secretly be, thrilled to have an extra hour if somebody cancels with us. But when you're, in the one down position as, the more vulnerable person in the relationship, that alone can send a message around the worth of the relationship. And so especially in the early stages of a relationship where the relationship is just being formed and the mentee has such little data about who you are and are you trustworthy, all of those little signs are not such little signs. It provides very important information to the mentee about, do you like me? Do you want to be with me? Is this relationship of value to you, or is it just some other kind of job for you? Mm-hmm. So I would just add that.
I think about this with our recruitment or in that screening process then too, about, like it would be really irresponsible of me right now with a 6-month-old and knowing how tight my rope already is and how many different phrases are in it to enter a mentoring relationship right now. I mean, I'm maintaining a relationship with a mentee that I've had for many years, but being really realistic with him about what he can expect, or the kinds of things that we can do. Like, yeah, you can come hang out with me and the baby, but we're probably not going to do as many, trips out to go do things or train for 5Ks or things like that. The other piece within this Act with Integrity principle that I thought was great that was mentioned was in the last paragraph about mentors should also conduct themselves with integrity in their mentee schools, homes, and communities, and being respectful of customs and regularities, and this piece about not acting in ways that leave programs needing to run interference, and thinking about that piece. And that's where that good intentions alone sometimes aren't enough, that we need to spell that out for mentors sometimes. And when you mentioned some of the technology and all of those pieces, that's where that training and our policies and all of those best practices and things that some of our intermediary groups are trying to share with programs, and programs are trying to share with mentors, but not to overlook how important it is to think about who are we recruiting and who is representing our program, and do they know where that relationship ends and begins, especially in smaller communities too, which here in Minnesota we have lots of those where everyone knows everyone and knows what they're doing, and can be a real benefit or hindrance to the program. Just peeking. Okay. So the next piece, the next principle, is this promoting justice for young people, and really avoiding this prejudicial treatment, which sometimes seems obvious, like, yes, we're going to treat everybody equally, but really this ethical obligation to recognize the differences in cultural backgrounds and values, and the issues that can lead to, the things that volunteers may unwittingly act on. We could again look at this one and think, well, maybe some volunteers would come in and intentionally harm someone that way, or I've heard of in different trainings where people said, well, I had a mentor apply, but they specifically requested not to be matched with any Mexican children, so that it led to this colorful conversation in a training, letting other people ask about that, but thinking, is this the right mentor? What are they bringing? What assumptions and what kind of values and prejudices that person bringing into the program, and bringing it into any young person, even if they're not matched with the Mexican child, then even if they're matched with somebody who's just like them, what kind of ethical attack is that on that young person? So, and then again, looking at how pre-match training and ongoing supervision are important, because we can't necessarily predict or know exactly where some of these issues are going to emerge. It may come up later, and again, most of it is unwittingly, and we're not sure what's happening. And within this one, then too, thinking about what kinds of training, how deep do we need to go with that in order to really help prevent these things? But even more so, I like that it recognizes the fact that most likely, these issues are going to happen, and it's important to know, so when they do happen, how do I handle that? Not necessarily that we can predict or prevent every cultural misunderstanding or difference in values, but that if we know how to work through that and do that in a positive way, that we can get to this last piece where, we don't often think about the impact of mentoring on the adults, but thinking about, by bringing adults into the lives of young people, that mentoring has this potential to really promote greater social change, and thinking about all the things that it does that it is a two-way street, and affects both people within that relationship and the people that they know, and can really extend and touch others. So more about promote justice for young people. Renee or Belle?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I would also point out that one of the things that in our attempts to raise cultural awareness that we sometimes can fall into, is stereotyping people from different cultures too. And I think that just as it's important to understand what cultural differences might affect a young person's life and the relationship with the mentor, it's also important not to make assumptions. I think a lot of this training is around good listening, and opening your heart and mind towards what different things mean to the particular young person that you're working with. So for example, like, there's research sometimes that shows that there's cultural differences between, and they put all Asian Americans together, and differences with Asian Americans and other kinds of ethnic minorities, in that they want to defer to authority, the guidance of authority figures, versus being given a more, autonomy. And that's something that may be true on average for a particular population of Asian Americans, but it's not true for every Asian American. And then there's, of course, differences across Asian American ethnic groups. So it becomes really important not just to assume this, and for a particular Asian American young person, and then decide that that this applies to them. Instead, it's about listening to them. I'm also reminded of a research study that we've cited in one of our papers, Renee and I, and Jean probably in some of our work, by Bei Cheng and colleagues, that shows what happened in one particular program where a program was set up to be sensitive to gender differences. It was based on feminist kinds of theories, and the theory was to really empower girls and to help them not to be exploited and that sort of thing. And so when they met with these girls, the mentors met with these girls in the middle school, they really shut down conversations that the mentees were wanting to have around sex and around relationships, and they said things to the mentees like, we shouldn't talk that way. That's not good. That you're going to be exploited if you have this kind of relationships with boys and that sort of thing. And really, inadvertently, when they were trying to empower girls, did not allow them to have voice. And so, kind of one of the morals of that story is that it can be even more important to give voice and to listen rather than to kind of impose certain values and, belief systems based on, multicultural research and feminist theory. So again, just to individuals as well.
Mm-hmm. Renee, did you want to add anything there?
No, I don't.
Okay.
You made great points.
Great. Within this one, another question that came up in some of my discussions in preparing for this webinar was, if we go back and think again about there are the ethical obligations of the mentors, but on the programmatic level. But, it's kind of a big question about how do programs decide that kids need mentors, and that sometimes the assumptions or the even stereotypes or the assumptions about that decision and what are the criteria for a mentees can be really value-laden and maybe inherently prejudicial. Do all kids from single-parent homes need a mentor? Is that something, in this day and age, is that still relevant for all kids? There's assumptions even about that all young people need a positive male role model. Does that say anything? And this is just hypothetical. Does this say anything inherently about the value of female role models? Is that not enough? Is that somehow deficient? Just some examples of, maybe where our values affect how we even decide that young people need a mentor or that our programs are necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And the last principle is this respect the young person's rights and dignity. And I had the great assistance of Shannon, who's also an organizer on this webinar and is our AmeriCorps member, but found this great diagram. But thinking about a couple different aspects of respecting the young person's rights and dignity, but this piece of the self-determination, and this is where we talk about mentors being, oftentimes we say what's a great characteristic of a mentor, people say that they're non-judgmental, that they're open-minded, but so what some of those things about really respecting the mentee and their families' ability to exercise their own reasoning and moral judgment, so to make their own choices, and it might not line up with your the mentor's personal goals or values or background, but respecting that it comes from where that comes from. We had a lot of conversation about how do you teach mentors this, like how do you do training to help them really become aware of what assumptions they come into it or what values they're bringing into it, and really allowing them to do this self-determination. This also raised a lot of questions about how do we prepare mentors for their relationship with parents or to navigate some of their emotions and opinions that may come up or some of the judgments that we make of some of the parents. And parents and families and some of the choices that they make, and that's what some of the examples here are about. The other part of this, respecting the young person's rights and dignity, we're looking at confidentiality as well, and within that, bringing up the issue of mandated reporting as well, and that we need to respect the rights and dignity of that young person and have the confidentiality with them, but respecting what they've told us, but thinking about how mentors might share that information with families. They might share that, what parents might share with them about their kids, and how to handle some of that information. Renee and Belle, I'll let you, go further on this particular one. I'll leave this slide up for now.
Go for it, Renee.
Yeah, I was just thinking about your some of the questions you were kicking around there, April, about sort of how do you train mentors in this, leaving room for self-determination, and it can be very tricky. I mean, I think that people are often on a real continuum in terms of how comfortable they are and how they respond to difference, people who hold different worldviews, different value systems, different beliefs. And when you get into a personal one-on-one relationship with somebody, with a young person and with their family, many of your values and beliefs, things that you take to be completely self-evident and true, can really get challenged by the other person because they believe something else is completely self-evident and true, and it's wildly different from what you believe. So how can that be? How can they both be self-evident and true if they're so different? And I work with social work students. This is sort of a core social work principle, this notion of self-determination. And one of the things I do with them, and I teach, get them sort of the first semesters. We do this exercise that really kicks up different values and beliefs and gets them sort of arguing with each other about kind of some core beliefs and things they think are true. And then I ask them to reflect on how they responded when somebody was articulating a very different opinion from theirs. And did they get defensive? Did they feel their blood pressure going up? Did their heart start to race? Did they find themselves shutting down? Did they find themselves opening up? Sort of what's their response when somebody presents something quite different from how they organize themselves in the world? And then sort of encourage them to try to get curious, that when they see those signs and signals of their response when something feels really different from them, to try to shift from a mode of having a judgment about it, that's good, that's bad, that's right, that's wrong, and instead to move to some curiosity. So tell me more about why you think that, or could I learn, tell me how you came to that conclusion, or why do you do that? And I've heard mentors describe doing this with kids, where they say, I interviewed one mentor who talked about, was matched with a mentee whose family was from South America, and they have a lot of superstitions, sort of rituals and superstitions from the mentor's perspective. She would describe them as superstitions. From the family's perspective, these are spiritual beliefs. And so when her mentee would talk about some of them, they were so different from what the mentor was accustomed to hearing that what she would do is sort of say to herself, I want to learn more about that. And so she would get the child to tell her more about, well, gee, she would say to the child, well, my family does it differently. We don't do it like that. So tell me how your family thinks about that, or tell me more about that belief. And so I think sometimes two mentors can believe they have to give up. This goes back to that integrity principle. You have to give up your own sort of values, beliefs, and worldviews. And that's really not the case at all. But it does mean that you have to get open to somebody who's might be different from you. There's also this one quote from a 7-year-old that, I'm from actually a middle schooler who was 7, when was reflecting on her 7-year-old self when she said this to me, and she was reflecting back on herself, and she said, just because I'm 7 doesn't mean I don't know things like how I feel. And I think if mentors can kind of hang on to some of that these youth and families have some ideas about what they think and what they feel, and we've got to respect that and give people room for that, even when we're not so sure it's the best or the right thing. It's not our life, it's not our choice. I think it can be really difficult, especially when you grow to really care about a child and that child's family. And if you see a decision being made that you're not so sure about, it can be painful, I think, for mentors. But it really is an important principle, I think, to grapple with, and to try to develop the sense of people really do have the right to make their own choices.
We had a question. I think, Renee, you may have just asked that. Cassie, you can confirm, but just Cassie asked the speaker just asked a question about how do we train mentors on the topic of diversity and respect the rights of the young person, so how do we do that? And I think you gave some examples and suggestions of things that could be effective. we at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota at least have pieces that we build into mentor training, but also a culturally smart relationships workshop that has really, what we found, has worked well as a follow-up to mentor training. That, you know, offering culturally smart relationships, this workshop, just as a anybody in the public can wander in and do it. It isn't really a safe enough space to have that kind of conversation, but if you had a cohort of mentors or people who are working through that might be a good workshop. It really looks at probably 75% of the time looking at helping mentors be aware of what they're bringing into the relationship, some of those assumptions, and, you know, what, getting in touch with, okay, so these are the values that I'm bringing into it, and then, you know, 20% of the time on skills. So how do I respect this young person? What does that look like? What does that sound like? How do I sift through some of those feelings in the moment? And then a little bit of time on knowledge, and really about knowledge is about, you know, sometimes we think of diversity training as learning everything, you know, kind of like Belle was saying, like it's based on stereotypes about different populations. So let's say, you know, that we're trying to share as much information as we can about, you know, Somali youth in our program, when really the knowledge should come from getting to know that Somali young person that you're working with, and because that's going to be a little bit different, you know. We've talked about this in a previous, I think in the research in action, where Belle, where you were participating, and we talked about diversity issues and mentoring. You know, that there's some great ideas within that research and action piece as well. But Cassie, we can talk more too offline about other resources, or if other participants have ideas for that. You know, we've got Christy from Mentor as well, so thinking about some of the tools that are available on that site. But really, I love it when we talk about raising awareness of mentors, you know, and that you have to be aware of the values that you're coming into the relationship with. So those are the 5 principles that are presented. I have a couple of questions that I can throw up here and see if we have some reaction to. I know that we do have another comment here or question, but some of the things that came up in our conversations are the connections to quality. So how are these ethical principles tied to this movement towards best practices and standards? You know, we're doing that in Minnesota, we're doing that in Massachusetts. There's a national conversation about these best practices. We have the 3rd edition of the elements of effective practice, and this real push for quality in all of our programming. So thinking about how people are framing that and using ethical principles to make those connections. And so I'll just throw out my other question then too, but so who's responsible for enforcing these ethical obligations or these ethical principles? So we had a really long conversation about the role of program staff, which then led to what's the role of parents, and how do we prepare parents for mentoring relationships so that we can fulfill these ethical obligations, or what is our obligation to parents? And also the conversation this raises with funders, you know, going back to kind of the background and the introduction, and looking at, you know, we have this assumption that we need to be launching new matches, and sometimes at the expense of supporting existing ones, and how do we frame this in message for funders? So I know we have another question or comment. Okay, it was just a thanks, but I'll let Renee or Belle, if you have any thoughts about either one of these, or any, you know, concluding thoughts, and see if some others in attendance have any thoughts about how they're grappling with these questions.
What do you think, Renee? Should I
Sure.
Well, I'll just, you know, the first question, just to tackle a little bit, and that Renee chime in, please, about between these ethical principles and best practices. These ethical principles are based on research that that tells us what about a mentoring relationship makes it most effective, and what things, what aspects in a mentoring relationship can make it harmful. And so, you know, one of the things that that has come out of much research is that the most effective programs are those in which the mentoring relationships within them are strong relationships. They're close, they're connected, and they're mutual in many ways. And so so we ultimately want to increase the level of closeness and of mutuality in these relationships, and these ethical principles are designed to help do those things. Renee, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I would concur. I mean, I think that the intention behind it really is for those to sort of go hand in hand. That that just as Belle's saying, that we were driven very strongly by the evidence in terms of what we know. We don't know the whole story, but what we do know now about what makes for effective mentoring relationships, and then also thinking about what we thought could enhance or help promote, higher quality mentoring relationships. And that's our hope, is that these ethical principles would help programs in that effort to deliver, high quality relationships, help guide their thinking, decision making, help them, in their work with mentors. That's really the spirit of it. It's our hope that this does in fact enhance quality.
Any others? Any hands? I'm waiting for hands to be raised here if they want to share. I know we're getting towards the end of the time. Let's see.
I was just going to say, April, in response to you had the question about the role of programs and funders, and when we were working on these, we had people say to us, you've got to incorporate, you've got to write about all of them at the same time, sort of write about mentors and write about programs and write, and I think we thought it was sort of, we wanted to write something that would be a manageable document, and so we sort of tackled it from the mentor's perspective, hoping that somebody would read it if we, left it manageable. So we tried to tackle it from the mentor's perspective, but I think the comments today really, speak to the things that you were picking up on, April, about how there are implications for programs, and hopefully that programs could use these guidelines to inform funders about the need for support. Support costs money. Making matches, is one kind of expense, but then supporting those matches over the long haul is another. And, we would hope that having these ethical principles would help funders understand how important support is, that you think about all these things that can happen that are unintended and not what you expected and not what you want to have in mentoring, but there are things that can happen when you form relationships. And so the kinds of things that programs often want to implement but have a hard time getting the dollars for, we hope that this will help in that endeavor.
Yeah, and Jenny, you said it well too, that there's a post here that I think there needs to be a more honest discussion between funders and programs around these ethical principles, specifically with what may be lost in the goal of fast growth or adding many matches year after year. So you continue to add those, and yeah, it just raises so many interesting conversations. I really encourage people, if you have a staff of people to talk to, to have that conversation, or to bring it to your board and have that conversation. And it might be that you do some reflection on your program and say, yeah, we've really got it, or it might be that there are some tweaks. I know there were people who said they were going to take the article and go through it, and kind of in a way that we would hope they go through the elements of effective practice and go through the checklist to see things that they can improve with their program. But somehow this article resonated a little bit better, and they were going to go through the article and see what are some things about my program that I could tweak, or about my training, and to make sure that I'm adding and covering all of these different principles. So, and if you don't have a staff to talk to, there are these networks, and find other peers to talk to, and hopefully this offers an opportunity to hear other people talking about it. I do have another comment here from Christy at Mentor. thanks again, but my observations are similar to the speakers. But Mentor will be moving forward to develop support for programs on these ethical guidelines. They're still planning, but many thanks from Christy then too. Great. Finally, if there are other comments that pop up, I do want to be able to formally end the webinar here and do that on time. So resources, if you download this or if you go to our website, or if you just Google this, you can get the entire article if you haven't read it yet. Again, also resources available from the Mentoring Partnership. And finally, just a thank you again to Belle and to Renee, and thank you to everybody who continues to participate in our webinars. Particularly this one is the first time we've had a small fee attached, trying to just cover the cost of the service and think about our own sustainability. And our next, we are going to continue doing the Quality in Action webinars. For a while, we do, Mentor is also doing the Elements of Effective Practice webinars, and definitely in talking with Christy and seeing how we can join forces, or if there's a need for both. So your thoughts about that would be really interesting too. If is this a different twist, and this idea of being able to go some deeper into some current research or current issues in the field of mentoring. I've said many times throughout the Research in Action that this originally was intended as a way to get information to programs in Minnesota, but if you are able to see the attendee list, you can see that we've got people participating from all over the country. So whether or not that's the role of the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota is another question we're grappling with. But thanks again, Belle, Renee, everybody. Our next Quality in Action webinar is June 2nd, where we have our journey map and just want to have a discussion of mentoring's impact on youth academic outcomes. We'll have some research attached to that as well. Thanks again. I'm going to stop recording, and if anybody has any additional questions, just stay on. I'll keep it open a little bit longer. Thanks a lot.